everybody. Welcome to Chapter 4 in my YouTube Odyssey here. We're going to head on that pathway I talked about last video, and we're going to shoot some tool-related safety videos. Now, tool videos, when it comes to safety, there's always problems with liability and things like that. So just to say this up front, I am not in control of your shop at all. So this is merely my suggestions of what I did when I was teaching industrial arts. By no way should you view this as the definitive guide to teach safety in your program. So basically, it's for entertainment purposes. Let's put it that way. So, now that we've got that over with, these videos that I'm going to start shooting, and it'll take a while because there's lots of equipment to cover, will be released over a period of time. And what they're designed to do is complement the materials that I'm publishing on Teacher Pay Teacher. Now, if you are a homeowner and you just want to learn to use your bandsaw, by all means, you're certainly welcome to watch these videos. But if I make reference to school shops and school programs, that's why that's happening. So these videos, eventually, hopefully when I get this one completely done, there'll be links to my Teacher Pay Teacher page, so people who are interested in my material can link to this video and use it as support if they would like to. So that's kind of where we're at. Also on Teacher Pay Teacher, what I neglected to mention last day is that as I get more and more content on that site, eventually package deals will start to show up. So I already have one, and it's mostly my grade 8 tools. So there's bandsaw, the lathe, belt disc sander, and oscillating spindle sander. And that retails for $9.99 US. So eventually there will be packages, and I think ultimately at one point there'll be a woodworking package. So if you're interested in all that material for your shop, that would be something that you could take advantage of. All right, so let's get started today on the topic at hand. Today's video is going to be bandsaw. This is part 1. Eventually, I think there'll be 3 parts to this, and I thought of making it all in one video, but I think that gets too long. And remember, I am trying to shoot this with school shops in mind, and having what hopefully will end up being maybe 3 20-minute segments may suit your classroom better than 1 hour video. I found that students often didn't have the attention span for a whole hour. So even if you want to just tell them to start when I finish my introduction, that's great. So anyway, here we go. So for today's video, I thought it's important to know the basic parts of your bandsaw. Now, to remember all these parts may be a little bit challenging. Yes, there really should be an assignment on them, but the assignment, knowing what everything is named, maybe isn't the most important thing for safety. However, understanding how the machine works is. So if you understand how things work, you can figure out what potential issues could be. The other thing that I want to clarify right away, I'm not sure which books you're going to be using in your classroom, and you may notice that I call parts by slightly different names than what your textbook says. So my apologies for that, but I think you'll be able to figure that out. All right? Okay, well, let's get started. The first and most important thing for you as an operator is the on-off switch. Okay? Now these on-off switches at a school shop need to be of a particular type. So this is what's called a magnetic starter. So inside this box, there's a magnetic contact that when you press the button, it clicks in. And if, say, the power goes out in your area and the saw shuts off without you pressing the switch, this magnetic contact goes apart and will not re-engage until you press the switch again. This is an important safety feature because it prevents, when the power goes on, that the machine lights up right away. So you'd have an uncontrolled start, which is not a very good thing. All right, so that's the on-off switch. Next, we're going to move up to the top here. Notice my safety plaque that I made last day. All right, the upper wheel housing. Okay, this is basically the safety guard that goes around the idler wheel. Now, in old bandsaws, you can go back and look at historic pictures of bandsaws, and there was no protection on the wheel. They were actually, I think, quite scary. So the upper wheel housing protects you from the idler wheel. So, and now that we're at it, this is the idler wheel. Okay, in a bandsaw, the lower wheel is the driven wheel. Okay, the motor's hooked up to that, it turns. And all this blade does, or this wheel, sorry, all this does is allow the blade to return to the bottom. So it spins. If you take the blade off, this one will just freewheel. Okay, that's why it's referred to as an idler wheel. Okay, the other important thing with the wheels of the bandsaw is, I haven't used the term yet, but this is a 14-inch bandsaw. How do they determine whether it's a 14-inch saw or not? Well, they simply measure the diameter of the wheels. Okay? What I like when I'm looking at the ratings of a bandsaw, personally what I look at is the size of the wheels and the size of the motor. Because for some operations, say like resawing, you need quite a bit of motor. So those are the two things that I would look at. One other thing, I closed this too soon. I don't know if you'll be able to see it properly in my video, and I apologize for that, but on this aluminum cast wheel, there's a groove in the face, and there's a piece of rubber or urethane in there. It's called the tire. And that tire has crown. And that crown is important when it comes to setting up this saw. It's important you understand that that tire has crown. Now, setup is a whole other video, which we may get into at some point. All right, the blade guards. So when the blade comes from the top wheel to the bottom wheel, if that makes any sense, it needs to be guarded as well. So this side, the non-cutting side, has a U-shaped guard that usually attaches here, and then there's a point down there as well. Okay, that keeps your hand safe. These guards are important. Please don't ever run your saw without them. The guard on the cutting side is a little bit different. It needs to move and adjust, and it has to leave a part of the blade exposed for cutting. So we're going to talk about the adjustments on the back when I move the camera to the back of the saw. But for right now, to adjust this and that upper guard, see, that's about how much blade you'd want exposed to cut this piece. And that guard will protect you to some degree from the blade. Yeah, I guess you could get in it from this side, but you'd have to be trying. All right, so those are the guards. Okay, the upper blade guide. On this particular saw, and not all saws are the same, these can either be blocks Like sometimes the older saws just use steel blocks, and then they kind of went to a synthetic style block, and some use ceramics, and there are all kinds of materials used. This particular saw runs bearings. So it's got guide bearings here that stabilize the blade this way, and then there's a thrust bearing at the back that when you push on the wood and the blade goes back a little bit, it hits that thrust bearing and won't go any further back. Now that thrust bearing is set very, very close to the back of the blade, so you hardly notice any flex in the blade at all when you cut with the saw. Again, setup, that's a whole other video. All right, so that's the upper blade guide. Okay, the insert. On all these saws, oops, can't get my fingers in there. There is an aluminum, come on, come out. This one's aluminum. Often they're made out of vinyl or plastic or something like that. Something that if the blade accidentally contacts it, won't make the blade dull. In fact, in a pinch, when I've needed to do this, I've gone to the lathe and made one out of wood, which is just fine. But in your school shop, your school should be equipped with the proper accessories for your saws. Okay, so I'm going to put this in there, and that should sit flush with the table. Okay, now for some of the items that help you make quality cuts on the bandsaw. For example, number one is the fence. Okay, this is an accessory fence that I built. So I bought this bandsaw from the school, and while it was at the school, I modified the fence, and then when I got it home, I just put the fence back on. So, but the fence is basically, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, a Biesmeyer copy. I know I'm familiar with that style of fence, but I always second guess whether I'm pronouncing the name correctly. But it's a Biesmeyer style fence that I constructed. There is a tape measure guide on this side. Sometimes they have them, sometimes they don't. Mine actually is fairly accurate. I don't use it that much though. And you can use the fence on either side of the blade. But one thing I wanted to show you is my fence is set exactly parallel to the miter slot. This slot in the table is referred to as the miter slot. So, and that's important that your fence is set up that way. Now on a bandsaw that can be a little bit more of a challenge to do, but again that's a setup video. So maybe I should make a setup video, eh? Okay, anyway, the other thing that, or I'll show you, another thing that's going to come in handy for you is the miter gauge. So hopefully you're aware that when you set the fence like this and you cut a piece of wood like this, now I'm standing all wrong to show you video, but this is referred to as a rip cut because you're cutting along the grain, all right? So the fence is really handy for a rip cut. For a cross cut, when you want to cut something to length, then the miter gauge, which is this attachment here, I don't know if you got a chance to see it. This is a miter gauge, an old one, but it works. And with a miter gauge, I'm standing in the wrong place for video, but you would hold it with your left hand like this and your right hand like this, and you would cut your piece and you'd get a square end if everything's set right. Okay, so that's a cross cut when you're cutting across the grain. The other thing that's important, and it's part of required safety gear in what I taught IA, are push sticks. These are really, really important. If you're making a rip cut and you need to make sure your hands aren't near the blade, these are handy. The cross cut with the miter gauge, you probably don't need them. I think they'd be difficult to use in that situation. But when you're doing freehand cuts, one of the things that we'll talk about in the safety rules when we go through that is really you want about a 2-inch margin of safety. That's about 50 millimeters. So 2 inches all the way around the blade. Imagine that. In fact, I think one of the things I'll do on my equipment is I'm actually going to draw a circle. And that'll help remind people that they need to keep their hands out of that area. Okay, so we've talked about everything on the top of the saw. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange a little bit. We're going to put the camera on the floor and I'm going to show you the underside of the table, okay? Okay, we're back. I spent a while trying to figure out how to shoot this on the tripod and I just can't. You can't see anything off the tripod. So I'm going to narrate this from behind the camera and hopefully this works for everybody. Okay, on the lower part of the saw, you've got the lower wheel housing, which is kind of the same as the upper wheel house, just the other wheel. And when you open that, what it does again is it protects you from the drive wheel, okay? Now the drive wheel, which is the bottom wheel here, that's the one that the power comes to. So when we go around back of the saw, I'll show you where that is, but this is sometimes referred to as the driven wheel. So the motor hooks up to this and this is what turns the blade, okay? There is a dust chute here, which, as you can see, probably isn't really the best for this saw. I think when I incorporate dust collection, what's common on a lot of the newer saws now is they'll have more than one dust port. They'll probably have one in the front there, which would do a good job of evacuating the dust. One of the problems with dust in the wheel housings of a bandsaw is they can actually mess with your settings. As I've seen bandsaw housings so full of dust that the dust has actually kind of pushed itself into the wheel and it changes the tension, it changes the tracking all a little bit. So having a dust-free environment for your bandsaw wheels is important. Okay, let's move along here. We are looking at, okay, we did that already, the dust chute. Boy, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, there is a lower blade guide assembly here. So like the top, it had the 2 side bearings and a thrust bearing. That is also at the bottom. And it's exactly the same setup as the top, but it has that there. And then it has an adjustment to tilt the table, and this one will go, what does it say? It'll do up to 45 degrees one way and up to 15 degrees the other way. So that can come in handy. We have used that at times, but there again, that's, I would term, a special setup. So get your instructor to help you do that. Okay, and there's another clamping mechanism, or this is actually called a trunnion. Sorry, this is actually called a trunnion. There's another one on the back here. Actually, it's one piece, but they're connected, and that controls the setting of the table. For 99% of what I do, it's usually at 90 degrees. Okay, looking at some other things down here while we're here. This is a King industrial saw, which is either made in Taiwan or in China, one of the two, and it's basically the same. To me, it looks suspiciously like a Jet, which they're probably made in the same factory. I like to hang a face shield on the tools that I use, so we'll talk about safety a little bit later. So that brings the front of the bandsaw kind of to a close here. So we're going to turn this off and I'm going to go around to the back side. And we're back. Sorry about having to move the camera around. Having a camera person for these would be extremely helpful, but hey, I do it on my own, so that's the way it is. We've moved around to the back of the saw, and there isn't that much left to cover. First of all, we're going to talk about the blade tensioning wheel. This tightens or loosens the bandsaw blade on the tires, okay? This knob here is for what's referred to as tracking. Remember I talked about the curve or the camber in the tire? Well, this allows you to set where you want the blade to be contacting that wheel, and that determines how it cuts. So that's an important adjustment right there. The other thing that you didn't see before, although I did use it, is this upper blade guide adjuster. Okay, now I could have oiled this. I could have used WD-40 and made it slide up and down really easy. But personally, I don't like that because now I can loosen this and it stays. So then, yeah, I have to use a bit more force, but I can grab it and I can move it where I want it and then lock it. Now, a lot of the more modern saws have kind of a gear assembly here that you loosen this and then you turn a hand wheel and there's a gear that moves this assembly up and down. That's a nice feature. One of the school's bandsaws where I worked had one. That was nice. Okay, there's a ledge here that is really part of the fence. What would be a good idea, and I'm not sure if I'll do it on mine because my space is kind of limited, but to be able to put an outfeed support on that would make it that you wouldn't have to have help when you're cutting a longer board, which is it's nice to be able to do your cuts completely by yourself. Okay, moving right along here, got a couple parts left. And oh, you know what? I'm gonna have to tilt you down a little bit and see how good my settings are because I played with this before. Okay, so hopefully that's good. I'm just simply gonna call this the transmission. In this particular saw, what happens is there's three different diameters of pulleys here on the motor which give you three different speeds, and then there's the opposite of on this pulley here. They're stepped in the opposite order. So the small ones on the outside on the motor, but on the transmission part it's on the big ones on the outside. So putting those belts on the different pulleys can give you different speeds. Now, apparently this saw was also designed for cutting metal, which you'd probably want to slow your surface feet per minute down when you cut metal. So anyway, this is the transmission. It turns the blade at the correct speed, or it makes it so you can turn your blade at the correct speed. And last, well, I guess kind of last, the motor. This happens to have a 1-horse motor, which is a decent bandsaw. It's nice for a school shop. It's a great choice. When we were building skateboards and longboards and cutting our own veneer, we did a lot of resawing. And believe it or not, we did a lot of resawing with this 1-horse saw. But my students had to be very good. It took them a while to learn how to use the saw well. To their credit, all of them learned how to do it. So that was awesome. But a 1-horse for resawing is a little underpowered. So for basic ripping and cross-cutting and cutting shapes, perfect. One last thing, the stand, just the metal thing that the saw stands on, which is important in the overall big picture here. But basically, that's that's everything. We've kind of gone through the different parts of the bandsaw, and like I said, it's maybe not that important that you know exactly what each part does, but hopefully now you have an understanding of how this saw works and what you would need to do to protect yourself when you're using it. So that's, I think, well, I hope you found this video helpful. Teachers, if you feel that this is content that is beneficial for your classroom, please leave a comment in the comment section below. And homeowners, hobbyists, also if you like this content and you think more of it is beneficial for you, please leave a comment below so I know what your likes and dislikes are. Also, I guess with that in mind, please like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you in Chapter 4.